Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me. We talk about faith and politics and all kinds of topics that really matter in our culture. So if you're tired of all the screamers out there taking all the oxygen out of the room and you want to join us in taking some of that space back, you'll love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I can't tell you how grateful I am. We have this place, we have this forum where I get to talk to some of the coolest people, some of the smartest people, some of the most interesting people, but we do it in a way that is edifying. My brother hates that word. That is fun, that is informative, that is just different, where we're not killing each other. And I just love it. I absolutely love it. So if this is the first time you're listening to this program, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you dig what we're doing, please tell somebody about it. Tell somebody about it. Leave a rating or a review. I think we're getting a big push on Pocket Cast this week. So yeah, check us out on that platform or others. And it really helps to get the word out to more people, and more folks can participate in what we're doing, talk politics and religion without killing each other. And we can have more conversations like the one we're having today with the man with the white flag, Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh is a former U.S. Congressman, a former presidential candidate, a nationally syndicated radio host, once dubbed the next Rush Limbaugh, I'll have you know. But now a man whose personal mission is to listen. With his growing podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh, he surrenders the urge to fight and strives to find a path to unite, not divide. Joe is also the author of Fuck Silence, calling Trump out for the cultish, moronic, authoritarian conman that he is. I still contend one of the best book titles I've ever heard. He is a former Tea Party firebrand turned woke never Trumper. He's also definitely a guy who strives to have meaningful conversations with folks from across the spectrum and yearns to give voice to so many who are somewhere in the middle. And I'm so grateful to get to hang out with him again today. Joe Walsh, thanks for coming back to TPNR, man. How you doing?
Hey, Corey, I mean it. No bullshit. It's awesome to be with you. And I loved your intro. You said you talked to some of the smartest, most interesting, engaging people. I don't know why the fuck you're talking to me. But then the last thing I want to say, Corey, is thank you for what you do, because you and I are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Get people to sit down, because this country is so dangerously divided, and we gotta fix that.
Yeah. It's a good point, because we come from different places. We have different stories. I think in circa 2010, 2011, we might have been at each other's throats, because I was already recognizing back then, even though I have conservative and libertarian, fiscally conservative leanings and socially libertarian leanings forever, from the time of around Sarah Palin, I was identifying that the way we talk to each other that disagree with us is really central to the problems. But I'm going to ask you more about that as we move on here. The first question that I want to ask you is, now that you're all woke and all, why do you want to break into my house and take my gas stove away?
Well, Corey, here's the funny thing about that. 2 points, by the way. And before I guess we get to gas stoves, and that is a funny issue. I embrace the term woke.
Yeah.
And I wasn't woke. To me, woke is just you've woken up, you've listened to people, you understand we still have problems that I wasn't aware of. There's basic unfairness and injustices I wasn't aware of, and we got to talk about them.
Yeah.
But there's such a backlash, and even like, Corey, I've been on Bill Maher's show a bunch, even like him and people on the left make fun of the term woke. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, we had a conversation at dinner the other night. And first of all, I wanted to ask about this chapter of your life. When I mentioned that you're coming back on the program, one of my buddies said, brought up the Muslim Obama thing or the Musket thing. Do you ever get weary of having to account for that again and again and again?
Yes, but I consider it part of the penance I got to go through. I really mean that. I've said and tweeted and done a bunch of shit I regret. So to me, the only way to deal with that is just fucking confront it head on. And Corey, you put something in front of me, like you put a tweet of mine from 6 years ago in front of me. I got to face it. And I'll either apologize for it or I won't apologize, and I'll explain what I meant by that. But the other thing is, like, I've been a very public person, and I've been in positions where it's been my job to push the fucking envelope. And often when I push the fucking envelope, I went too far. But no, saying I'm sorry is what I have to do. I've got to live with that.
So you really have awakened, if you will, or you transformed. You've had an evolution of sorts. Is there? It seems like a lot of folks can only hold our past transgressions in their minds. It's like they don't allow for the fact that there is an evolution on the part of someone they've deemed to have crossed a line for them. So is there a line someone could cross, whether it's in word or deed, from which they should not be welcomed back? Or should we continue to provide off-ramps for folks, whether they be former Tea Party agitators or part of the Stop the Steal or anybody like that? Is there a line somewhere where, like, no, dude, you got a life sentence and you're going to be, on MAGA Island for the rest of your life?
I guess short answer is no. To me, there's not a line. And again, my vantage point, Corey, might be pretty screwed up because I come from the MAGA right. And right now, I'm considered a traitor by the MAGA right. There are a lot of people, as you know, Corey, who on the left, who will never, ever buy my transformation. I get that. They'll never forgive me for some of the shit I said. I just think, I think anytime somebody has a legit moment of genuine remorse, that needs to be embraced.
Yeah.
And I don't believe I think it's so important to have a conversation with anybody. Too many people on the left, too many Democrats write off everybody who voted for Trump as just some racist hillbilly. Fuck that. It's wrong. But what a bad thing to do, to just write off half the country. So no, to me, there's no line.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Later this week, I'm going to be at an industry get together, this thing called Podfest. It's going to be fantastic. A bunch of people who are passionate about podcasting as a medium, as ways of engaging our world in this new way, are getting together. At the last big get together, the national get together, it wasn't Podfest, it was another organization. There was a pretty big hubbub because one of the biggest podcasters in the world is Ben Shapiro. And Ben Shapiro's company, his production company, was one of the big sponsors there. Yeah. And he happened to live in that. I think he lives in Dallas, or was there for something else. And he happened to stop in on the show, on the convention. And somebody really, really objected to his very presence in the convention hall. And it got me thinking, like, I could see if it was somebody like Alex Jones. But like Ben Shapiro, you could really object to a lot of the things that he said, especially this individual is a trans LGBTQ trans person, and just they used the word unsafe. So who am I to judge how they're to feel? But it really got me thinking and digging in on that. Is there a line somewhere where we cannot hold space with somebody who has very different views than us? That's one of the reasons I was thinking about it. But talking to you, like, man.
Well, as you said, Corey, I guess that's up to each and every one of us. I mean, somebody at that conference, Ben Shapiro was speaking at that conference. Shapiro should have a right to speak. He's a legit voice. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he's a legit voice. But if somebody's uncomfortable with that, then that person shouldn't attend that. That person shouldn't then listen to Shapiro when he speaks at that event.
Right.
Where I have an issue is when we get to a point where we say, well, disinvite Shapiro because 1 or 10 or 50 people feel uncomfortable. Disinvite that point of view. I think this goes to how we don't speak with each other. We don't know each other. And so a lot of us are uncomfortable with viewpoints that we shouldn't be uncomfortable with. I disagree with Ben Shapiro fundamentally. Ben Shapiro thinks Donald Trump is a piece of shit. But Ben Shapiro doesn't have the courage to say that because Ben Shapiro has a business model that forces him to sidle up to Trump and Trumpism and MAGA. Fine, that's his business model. But he's not Alex Jones, right?
There's a difference there. There's a difference.
Huge difference. I can see where, Alex Jones is invited to speak. 1,000 people stand up and say, don't invite him. But even then, I'm kind of a free speech absolutist, man. I listen to anybody speak and protest, outspeak them, do whatever. But I just don't like us shutting people down.
Yeah, I have nuanced views on that issue because on the one hand, that organization is a private organization. So the owners of the company, if you will, I'm not sure if they're a nonprofit, if they got a 501c3. I'm not sure what structure they are. Regardless, they're a private organization. So the owners or the board has the right to say, you know what, there's a line for us, and Ben Shapiro crossed that line. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, they're presenting it as we are an industry, we're a community of diverse voices, and we're celebrating diversity. And I'm thinking, are you really celebrating diversity? And okay, so there's a line somewhere. I agree with that. And you and I talked about Alex Jones being over that line, but Ben Shapiro's over that line. And if he is, tell me what that line is, because I think I've probably crossed over it myself.
And in my congressional days and talk radio days, Corey, I often made fun of snowflakes on the left. Right. You and I knew the stories.
Yeah.
Some conservative was invited to speak on a college campus, and all the students and administrators wrung their hands and said, "Oh, we can't have him on our campus." And I'd rightly make fun of those people. Come on, grow up. What's interesting is we have a lot of that same snowflake mentality on the right now. It's part of what Trump is. I mean, Trump's the biggest fucking snowflake in the world. He tries to shut down people who make him uncomfortable. We've got people on the right banning books and shit. This is really problematic in a society that should be all about the exchange of ideas. And I worry about canceling people. I really do.
So you bring up an interesting point. I have been talking to some of my buddies who are kind of easing their way off of the Trump train. And a lot of them currently are embracing, as you could probably guess, Ron DeSantis. My contention, though, is that Ron DeSantis, at least in his most public, high-profile issues that he speaks on, is not a conservative. He's almost an anti-conservative. So since you're here, I mean, you're a public figure, you're an elected official, congressman, national radio show. You've thought about this stuff, and you still consider yourself a conservative, lifelong conservative. What is conservatism, and is Ron DeSantis a conservative?
No. You're right, man. Look, I left the Republican Party 3 years ago when I finished my crazy primary challenge against Trump. I've always labeled myself a conservative. I hate that label though, Corey, because conservative makes me think like angry white guy. But I'm generally pretty libertarian. What has conservatism always been to me? Free minds, free speech, free market, free trade. Generally, government staying the hell out of my life. Let me keep the money I make and all the rest. That's always been conservative to me. That's not this party anymore, the Republican Party, which is why I left. It's an authoritarian party. So they right now worship people like Trump and DeSantis who use government to tell people how to think. Ron DeSantis is trying to tell teachers in Florida what they can and cannot teach about race. That's not conservative to me. I don't want any governor, Democrat or Republican, telling teachers what they should teach in a classroom. So no, to answer your question, no. Today's Republican Party is authoritarian. It's not conservative, which is why so many people like me no longer identify.
Yeah, that's some of the things that came up relatively early on when I was starting to really look at DeSantis's record, how he was dealing with companies during COVID, during the pandemic, telling companies, no, you cannot have this policy when it comes to vaccines. Now, whatever your position on vaccines is, I happen to have had all my vaccines. I have one of my kids who chose not to get vaccines. So I had to learn a lot about his point of view and why he was taking that stance. But as a business owner, I don't want a governor or a government official of any kind telling me what my policies should be.
And Corey, as a conservative like me, who believes in the free market and the private sector, It is anathema to me that the government can tell a restaurant they can't require their waiters to wear masks. That private company should have the freedom to make that call.
Right.
But today's Republican Party believes in using the force of government. It's not even like DeSantis is the opposite to me when it comes to freedom.
You know, I was thinking, so I didn't think we'd get into issues right away because I'm usually more evergreen in what we discuss. But another issue came up at the same dinner the other night. All of us at the table are very supportive of LGBTQ rights. I happen to have one of my kids identifies as non-binary, so I'm learning all about pronouns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get better at it and speak that language and honor this young person who's amazing to me, and I'm learning all kinds of stuff. There was an incident a few days ago at an NHL game. I forget which team. Oh, it's Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Of course it would be Philadelphia.
Yeah.
where a guy said, you know what, it's against my beliefs, so I'm going to choose not to participate. Even though I support LGBTQ, I'd probably be wearing that rainbow jersey if I was an NHLer. I also support this guy's right not to participate. Where do you stand on that?
Again, you make a really important point, Corey. We're not talking about the government demanding this hockey player do something.
Right.
We're talking about what I think it was a league thing. Was it a team thing or a league thing?
I know the Rangers are doing, they have a Pride Night as well, so it must be an NHL league.
So to me, in my world of freedom, the NHL has a right to implement whatever policy they want to implement. An individual team has a right to implement that policy. A team member has a right to say, because of my freedom of conscience, I can't participate in that. That hockey player should have that right. But then I believe the private entity then should have the right to penalize that player if that team so chooses. I would hope the team or the league wouldn't penalize that player. And I think if you supported Colin Kaepernick's right to take a knee during the anthem, you should support this hockey player's right not to wear that jersey with the LGBTQ emblem on it. I wish we were just all more tolerant. That's all.
I think that's where I come down on it. I wonder if the league or the Flyers chose to sit him for that game. I wonder how I'd feel about that. I think I support the player's right not to participate in compelled speech. So I support his right, but I also believe that he should be willing to accept the consequences. So the same way that, you know, one of Dr. King, since it's just recently Dr. King's birthday, Dr. King, one of his greatest treatises, he wrote from the Birmingham jail, you know, so he was protesting. I support that right to for nonviolent resistance, but I also believe that one should be willing to accept the consequences of one's actions as well.
And the consistent thread, Corey, is in the private domain, entities and individuals should be free to make their decision. And I agree with you. If you play it all the way through, that team, that private entity should have the right to sit him for a game. I would interject and I'd exercise my right to speak out, and I'd encourage the team not to penalize him.
Sure.
But I acknowledge that the team has that right at the end of the day.
So last time we spoke, we got to talk a little bit about Susan and Charles Walsh. I think you mentioned that they've passed away.
Oh, it makes me sad every day. Yeah, like all within the past 3 to 4 years, Corey. They both passed away within about a year of each other. Loved them to death.
They got to see you get elected to Congress. They got to see your success with the radio show. One thing I was curious about, did you ever, you mentioned that Susan in particular was politically engaged. Yeah. Was there ever a time where you crossed the line where you got a call from Susan, William Joseph Walsh? What did you say?
Oh, completely. All the time, Corey. All the time. And I miss my mom to death. But yeah, I come from a big family, and maybe you can relate to this, but I come from a family that shuns the public eye. I grew up, I don't know how you grew up, Corey. I grew up in a big old Irish Catholic family. My mom and dad taught us never fucking talk about yourself. Don't bring attention to yourself. in my big family, I became a very public person. And most of my family was always uncomfortable with that. Not only was I a public person, I was a damn outspoken public person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I stepped in it a lot, and I had a viewpoint, and my mom wasn't comfortable with that viewpoint. My mom was a good traditional Republican. I never considered myself a Republican. I was a musket grabbing Tea Party dude. So there were plenty of times where she would pop me upside the head.
Yeah, I would imagine the party of Eisenhower was a very different party than the party of Palin.
Yes, completely.
So you bring up an interesting point. You've obviously had a major transformation, but in some ways your moorings are still, you still have, your foundation is still the same.
I'm going to stop you because maybe I'm saying what you're saying, because I've like, Corey, I don't know of anybody else in the country who like has my public profile, who went down the same fucking road I've been down the last 10 years. I mean, think about it. I was the face of the Tea Party, Obama's biggest opponent, the most outspoken member of Congress, one of the most divisive syndicated talk radio guys. I vote for Trump. I supported Trump at the beginning. I turned on Trump. I turn on Trump and I lose everything. My radio show, Fox News, I lose it all. And then I primary Trump. And then I become Trump's most conservative opponent. And then I work my ass off the last 2 or 3 years helping Democrats get elected. It's been a bizarre journey. I don't know anybody else who's been on the same road. But even on this bizarre journey, I'm still philosophically, with some changes, I'm still the same kind of Tea Party libertarian guy philosophically, but I'm not a dick anymore. I've changed who I am as a person.
There are so many issues that come up where I'm curious about your thoughts, but there is this growing ecosystem. In a lot of ways, I think it's the hope of our future, not the hope of our future. That may be too much to put on it, but there's this growing ecosystem of people that have had similar, that have walked similar paths, although their specific ingredients are a little bit different. But, I mean, Charlie Sykes and the Bulwark and Bill Kristol and all the folks at the Dispatch, and from political strategy standpoint.
Right. But let me correct you right there. Here's what's weird about me. Unlike Charlie Sykes and Bill Kristol and all the Bulwark dudes and all the Dispatch dudes, everybody else in the never Trumper world, they were never Trump from the beginning. Like before Trump, Corey, me and Bill Kristol were on opposite sides. He was an establishment fuck. I was the Tea Party dude. The Dispatch guys, all of these never Trumpers, they were like establishment Republican guys, Mitt Romney, John McCain. I'm the only never Trumper who literally comes from the mega base and left it. I only want to make that one distinction. Now we're all on the same team. Yeah. But none of these guys had that road. They all opposed Trump from the beginning. From the get-go. Yeah. Whereas a guy like Kinzinger or Representative Liz Cheney, they very much, and if you look at their voting record, I mean, they continued to vote with Trump over 90% of the time, respectively. So well, here's the funny thing about Kinzinger and Cheney, and Kinzinger's a buddy of mine. We got elected together. I respect the hell out of both of them. Kinzinger opposed Trump in 2016. Oh, but then he supported him in 2020. And then in 20, he supported him. Liz Cheney campaigned her ass off for Trump in 2020. Like, that's always, Corey, kind of been my red line. People ask me all the time, will I support other Republicans? I can never support a Republican who supported Trump after 4 years of that guy in the White House. Both Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger did. It wasn't until January 6th where they said, forget it. Yeah, that's why I asked what I asked. Is there an off-ramp? Do you want to continue to provide off-ramps? And it's the hard part for me is like, okay, so
I like my heroes who weren't captured wasn't enough. Helsinki wasn't enough. Charlottesville wasn't enough. Like one after the other. We could go through a long, long list, literally daily throughout the, however many days of Trump's presidency. But for you, so you becoming, there's so many questions about becoming a never Trump woke guy. Was it one big epiphany, or was it more gradual over time for you?
So, and I think I've said this to you before. I voted for Trump in 2016. I'm on the radio, 100 some stations around the country. I'm on Fox News every day. I've been told privately I'm going to be the next Rush Limbaugh. I'm on that road. And when Trump runs in 2016, and I didn't really love him or like him. He blocked me on Twitter during that first campaign.
Oh, wow.
But because I would criticize him. I'm in a business where I get paid to say what I think. But I supported him, Corey, because I knew the same people who supported him supported me. His followers were my followers. His friends were my friends. I knew why people clung to him. And I believed it. I think our political system was fucked back then. We needed disruption. I went to DC before Trump to be a disruptor. There's good disruptors and bad disruptors. I just didn't pay enough attention to what a bad guy Trump was. So he gets elected in 2016. He's sworn in. He becomes president. Corey, I then start to pay attention to him every fucking day. And I remember coming home a month after he was sworn in early 2017, after my radio show. And I turned to my wife before we went to bed, Helene, and I said to her, this Trump thing is not going to end well for me, for us. I'm gonna take a big hit. So I knew then that me speaking my mind, I was going to eventually have to turn against him. So
what was more important to you? I guess I'm asking you to articulate an internal drive, but clearly there was something that was more, because you had wealth, you had influence, you had all the signs of outward success. What was more important to you than all that?
Well, and by the way, Corey, I had all of that for the first time in my life.
Wait, so when you were studying at Strasbourg, you weren't like famous and rich?
Famous. No, see, that's the funny fucking thing. When I went to Congress, Corey, 435 members of the House, I was voted the poorest member of Congress. Literally. When we found that out, I laughed. My wife cried. I've never been driven by money. So then I leave Congress. I become this right-wing media guy. And for the first time in my life, man, I'm making money. But that's easy, brother, because you're probably cut the same way. I couldn't fucking live with myself if I didn't say what I believed and did what I think was right.
Yeah.
And I was in a profession where every day I got beat up by my radio bosses. Come on, say good things about Trump. Every week, my radio colleagues, the other talkers, would call me, "Hey, Joe, you got a bright future, man. Come on, man. Get on board." I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. It's a fair point. I still struggle with some of the decisions I've made along the way and what ended up getting me into a little bit of trouble. I was torn. I remember there was this one particular day where I got two big checks from clients, and it was both checks were bigger than what my dad ever made in an entire year.
Yeah.
But it was at a time in my career where I was representing clients where I could make the case, I could articulate a case for them. Oh, they're the best at this and the best at that. But inside, I knew that I had certain principles when I was taking on a client. And the most important one was, what is their culture like when you walk in their door? Culture is kind of like a mist that you can almost feel, but you can see how people are talking to each other in the hall. You see what projects they prioritize. And I knew I was justifying it. I was almost lying to myself internally that they weren't getting A's or even B's in all the important categories for me.
Yeah.
So over the years, I've had to, I recently took on a new client. I said, you're one of only 2 people in the entire industry that I would, or companies in the entire industry that I take on. They're awesome people. It's an awesome company.
Corey, you strike me as a dude who at the end of the day couldn't fucking sell your soul. I
tried, man.
Believe me, it's not easy.
I tried to talk myself into it.
and I get it. And there was probably a moment before I turned on Trump publicly where I said, come on, man, do you really want to do this? Because every one of my former colleagues in Congress, they all sold out. Every other right-wing media dude sold out. The money was good. The ratings was good. I could have gotten elected again. I could have been anything. And it's hard to walk away from that, but I couldn't live with myself. Just couldn't.
So pull back the curtain for us, because I have this conversation with folks a lot of the time that what you did or what Charlie did when he was on the right, conservative Firebrand. What is your job on a daily basis? Like what is the recipe? You go in the morning, or maybe you're preparing the night before. What is the secret sauce? What is the trick?
That's a great question, Corey. Look, my secret sauce has always been, I've been honest, and I'm passionate, and I'd go on the radio or TV and I'd very honestly, passionately say what I believed. That's how I did it. And by the way, that got me in trouble a lot because I would honestly and passionately go over the line. For a lot of guys in this business, right-wing talk, it's entertainment. Rush Limbaugh was the fucking king. He was just an entertainer. He didn't believe half of what he said. Hannity's a bullshit artist. He doesn't believe half of what he says. So I think most of my colleagues were that way. I couldn't be that way. Because like every day I'd turn on the mic and I had a show that I had to get off my chest. But the bad part of it was I knew there was currency in pissing off your audience, in inflaming them and riling them up. So there were times I did too much of that. You see guys like Tucker Carlson and all the rest, they do that every night now. I did too much of that I'm not proud of.
Yeah, I have this very unformed theory. I actually started to talk to your old campaign man. Not old, she's wonderful and she's annoyingly young, Lucy Caldwell. But I threw some of these hypotheses, unformed hypotheses by her, and guys like Dan Bongino, Sean Hannity, even Ben Shapiro to a certain degree, they're almost like crack dealers, or they're appealing to the same parts of the brain that crack and heroin are appealing to. So, and you've mentioned in other interviews that one of the things that you would do, and I saw this on January 6th, that's why it became crystal clear to me. I turned on the last 15 minutes of the Will Cow Majority and the first 15 minutes of Hannity's radio program on XM. And they went into this is what they do mode. So they were, instead of talking about January 6th, they were talking about some of the protests over the summer that got violent. And only 7% of them, by the way, for the record, did get violent. Even the ones that did get violent, a very small percentage of individual people within those protests got violent and created havoc. But you take those isolated individual incidents or those individual people, and you blow it up and say, this is what they do, whether it's the left or the Democrat Party, the Democrat Party, or, anybody, the rhinos, this is what they do. You generalize and oversimplify and mischaracterize.
Corey, that's spot on. Understand that our audience, the right-wing audience, is primarily middle-aged, older white people. And so you do that. You find one department store somewhere in Vegas that doesn't let its employees say Merry Christmas during Christmas time.
The war on Christmas.
And you go, but here's the key, Corey. You go on your show that day, and I would do some of this, but you go on that show that day or night and you tell your audience there's a fucking war on Christmas. This is happening everywhere. Now, understand, there's a kernel of truth. There are people in this country who try to be politically correct and say happy holidays, but you blow it up because your audience is white people who desperately want 1954 America back.
Yeah.
So you scare the shit out of them every day and night that they're never getting it back.
I'm telling you, man. So when I was going into the city to New York every day, I was going, I was a stockbroker during the day, and our main office, well, the main office was downtown, but the offices I was in was in Red Bank on the Jersey side. So I'd take the train, I'd drive into Hoboken and take the path in to the city to get to my theater. And I'd go through, I think it was Union Square, it's on where Broadway, not 23rd. Anyway, I walked through this little mini park where Broadway intersects with a couple of big streets. Yeah. And there was always this one guy who, when you pass him, he's like saying under his breath, acid, cocaine, smoke, acid, cocaine, smoke. So that's basically what Hannity is. Hannity's that guy in the little square saying acid, cocaine, smoke, and getting like millions of listeners, or maybe Tucker, millions of listeners. So how do we solve it? How do we get people getting off of their addiction to political, social crack and addicted to healthier, I don't know, kale and compromise?
Boy, I'll tell you what, Corey, that's the $1 million question. So again, because I come from that world, I spend a lot of my week engaging with people in that world. And you've heard me call myself a reformed gangbanger. I'm trying to save other people from the gang. Most can't be saved. It's a big part of why I think, Corey, my former party is pretty much toast, because older white people die eventually. And the party isn't replacing these people with young voters and people of color, because they rightly look at this and say, that's not what I want to be. Yeah. So I think the party's in a lot of trouble.
So you bring up a really good point that I was going to ask you about. A reformed gangbanger. What have you found to be effective ways of persuading someone or helping an individual with their own awakening, whether it's on a particular point, like the election wasn't fucking stolen, asshole, or that's not a good persuasive way to go about it, but or in a broader understanding that people outside your bubble aren't, the embodiment of evil. What have you found to be effective ways of engaging?
Well, it helps to be me. Like if you're a liberal or a Dem, or you're an MSNBC watcher trying to talk to these people, you're not going to get in the door. So because I'm of them, I come from their world, they listen to me. And Corey, the only success I've had is when I listen and I continue to put little nuggets of truth in front of them over and over, like the election, and you just keep asking them questions, and then you put a little truth in front of them, but you keep listening to what their grievances are, because they have grievances, and you talk to them about those grievances. I think if you go down that road eventually, so many of these people, Corey, just want to fucking be heard.
Yeah.
But you can't be a patsy. It's also got to be tough love. You got to continually put truth in front of them. I've found that's the only way I've had any success.
It sounds a lot like a book. One of my favorite books that I read toward the end of last year is called I Never Thought of It That Way by Monica Guzman. She is with the Braver Angels. She is admittedly proudly liberal, but her parents are immigrants from Mexico who are also big Trump supporters. So she's had to learn to have these conversations in her own family. She loves her parents. And she studied it also as a journalist. How do you do this? And then she's put these big larger conversations together. She lives in a county that I think was about 80% Biden voters. And she found the nearest county that was maybe it was 70%, but it was largely Biden. And then she found the nearest county she could that was largely Trump voters. So it was, the opposite, about 5 hours away. She's on the Washington state side. She found a county on the Oregon side of the border and had these big conversations. And one of her big takeaways was just that. And that's the title of her book, is just being able to listen to someone so that you could really understand and say, oh, I never thought of it that way,
You keep drilling down on what their grievances are.
Yeah.
And you keep peeling that onion till you get to the core of it.
Yeah.
I found that that's a really helpful process.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing that you're not going to convince the entire, group, but you can have a moment with one individual that you're talking to, that relationship-based conversation.
And Corey, by the way, this could be done on a much bigger fucking scale if some network executive had courage. Like, can you imagine if Fox News gave me a nightly show, a hardcore Tea Party conservative who's anti-Trumpism in this Republican Party?
Yeah.
I think a show like that would be lights out. I think the ratings would be off the chart. But I would do this. I would engage with these folks.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think executives, TV people don't think there's money in something like that. Like, why doesn't CNN or MSNBC, Corey, have a show with a principled conservative and a principled liberal having interesting talks about issues? Maybe there's no money in that.
Ah, man, I'd like to think that there is.
It's all tribal.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that in a black and white world, the color ads get a lot more eyeballs. In a color world, sometimes a black and white ad will get more eyeballs. So for me, I know that the show that I am always tuning into on a weekly basis is Michael Smerconish's show on CNN. At 6 a.m. here on Saturday mornings. It's just a different show. Now, listen, I love me some Anderson Cooper. Like Lisa says, if I ever get a call pass, it would be with Andy Cooper.
Yeah.
That's what we call him. No, I'm just kidding.
He's a great guy too. Anderson's a really good dude.
I've heard that. But Smerconish has a different voice. He sounds different because if he doesn't finish a show without pissing off some liberals and some conservatives, he just hasn't done his job. So I really like that.
Okay. But I was just going to say, I agree, Corey, with what you said about Smerconish. Why doesn't he'd have a nightly show primetime on CNN? I think if that would sell, if that sold.
There's a lot of shows though. Here, think about this though. The difference between streaming and broadcast is that streaming can build an audience over time. There are still people who are tuning into Ted Lasso for the first time, or back in the day, there would be shows. MASH didn't get an audience until season 3. Yeah. I think that some executives or even maybe somebody on the board like Paul Ryan has to say, no, you know what? Let's get behind a Secretary Pete show. Let's get behind. I don't know who it would be, but it would or a Joe Walsh show. I think if you did it right and you really invested and gave it time to breathe, let it flesh out, I think that there's money there, because you and I both know that the fringes might be the loudest, but they're not the majority. The majority is exhausted and in the middle. And somewhere, for example, you were talking about an interview you did the other day. You were talking about your position on pro-life.
Yeah.
Now, it is not the hardcore pro-life from the moment of conception thing. And when it comes to legislation, you're even more nuanced than that. I think 90% of the people, certainly 80% of the people, do have nuanced views. If you allowed Nancy Mace to get together with Spanberger in Virginia, I think that they could figure something out somewhere between, 15 weeks and 24 weeks, somewhere in there. And then really figure out, so to your point that you were saying the other day, so if we're making abortions illegal after a certain time, that we also have to come with support for the woman and the child. So I think there's something there. Here's what I wanted to ask you about this. So I'm going on a little.
I love it, Corey. Go, girl, go. I mean it.
Okay. All right. So something I think we both have in common is it's challenging trying to hold space or be accepted across different worlds, different communities. Yeah. In my case, I grew up very observantly Jewish, going to an Orthodox synagogue, then became a Christian later in life. I am in 2 very different religious communities. Yeah. My career, I've worked in and among the entertainment industry in Hollywood, but I'm going to, a big Southern Baptist church. My kids are going to a Christian school. 2 very different socio-political communities, very different. But in your case, you came on the public stage, a rabble-rouser, Tea Party movement. You have a very successful conservative radio show across the country for quite a few years. And yet from around 2018 on, because of Trump's takeover of your old party, you've had to distance yourself from much of what defines that political community, your people. So you're shunned by those who still insist on bowing down to the Trump idol. And I'm sure, just like I heard the other night at dinner, there are many outside of MAGA world who still want to associate you with some of the more controversial things you said in your Tea Party and conservative radio days.
Right.
So these days, as you're writing this next chapter of the Joe Walsh story, do you struggle to feel accepted, to find a community of people that you could call my people or my home?
Yeah, I feel homeless. I've felt homeless these last 5 years. I'm older than you. I don't know that I'll find a home before I leave this planet. I got a voice. It's a pretty unique voice. I may never be able to monetize that voice. Corey, I'd love to run for office again. Love. How do I do that? I'll never be a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. It's almost impossible to win as an independent. So yeah, this is a no regrets, but this is a difficult, lonely spot to be in. No doubt about it.
So I'm going to ask you another personal question. Where is your belief in terms of God or a higher power?
Such a freaking good question. And I think maybe you and I haven't talked about this. Born and raised traditional Catholic, always been Catholic, almost became a priest in my early 20s. But I've never just accepted the fact that this guy lived 2,000 years ago. He preached for 3 years. He was killed on a cross. There was an empty tomb, and then he rose again in 3 days. I've spent my life studying whether that happened because it matters to me. So my religious faith, I believe in a higher power. I believe in a God. I believe there's something that created all of this. As a Christian my whole life, do I believe that God became man 2,000 years ago and died on a cross and rose again? I want to say yeah, but I've spent my whole life trying to figure out if that is a yeah.
Yeah. That's man. We got to have a whole other conversation just about that.
You
stuff.
and I got to have a conversation about this.
Yeah. So some of the stuff I read before I was a Christian, I found less persuasive, but it was at least an introduction to what you're talking about. Was there a Yeshua ben Yosef, better known as Jesus, that walked the, Palestine area, a Jew, a Middle Eastern Mashiach? The stuff that I was reading prior to becoming a Christian wasn't as persuasive. It was stuff like Josh McDowell, his evidence that demands a verdict. Although I appreciated him trying to present an empirical case for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The stuff that I found a lot more persuasive was actually, it was also history work, but it was more academic history work. It was stuff by like N.T. Wright, Tom Wright's stuff. But his led to other theological implications. So for me, that's where it really resonated. When I didn't know what I was reading at the time, but I read the Sermon on the Mount. And to me, as an observant Jew, it looked like a Devar Torah, like what rabbis do after we read a portion of the Torah. And it was just so profound. That's what really pulled me in, the theological convictions. And the painting, the picture that an N.T. Wright paints of first century Palestine allowed me to imagine myself there and saying, this Yeshua is teaching something very, very different. And I think that he is the shepherd. I think that he is Mashiach. I think he is, that I believe this. And those conversations were happening at the time because there were the Essenes and there were the Zealots and there were the Pharisees. They were all kind of arguing with each other. And my dog, by the way, I don't know if you hear, he's arguing too. He's making his
I love
point.
it. I love it. But Corey, Jesus was apocalypto. I mean, Jesus believed literally the kingdom of God was coming like now. His earliest followers, Paul and the rest, literally believed in their lifetime the kingdom was coming. You could make a really credible case. Jesus had no intention to ever build or grow a church. I mean, the end of the world was coming then. It's fascinating to really, I don't know how you can be a faithful Christian and not constantly study and test your faith, I guess is what I'm saying. No, that's been me.
Since you bring it up, I think, though, the mistake that we make is we apply a present understanding of heaven and hell that, frankly, is disconnected from the scriptural understanding of, okay, our Father who art in heaven. What Jesus is talking about there is a very this worldly new earth, or a renewed earth. A lot of times when we're thinking about it, we're thinking of more of an Aristotelian version of that, this disembodied, completely, spiritual, non-physical. That's not what Jesus was talking about.
Well, I agree, but either way, Corey, it was happening in their lifetime. They believed either way, and that was profound.
Yeah.
And then just to think then that Christianity formed from that. When he died on a cross, the Messiah, the king, and the Jewish version of Messiah back then, It wasn't a dude who died on a cross, some poor, right? So fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Like I said, that's a whole other, I'll bring it on to the religion and politics as opposed to politics and religion. But okay, so one more question about this. So if you, in your moments when you hear or feel the presence of God or a higher power, where do you feel prompted? What are you being called to do at this point in your life, or when it comes to your life or your family, your community, your country? Or do you feel a higher power that's calling you to something? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, I've always felt called to have a mission to improve people's lives. Most people don't know I was a social worker, and a teacher. But I've always felt called to help those less fortunate. And it's why I got into politics. And so I feel called still now to, it's a country thing. I love America. I taught about America. I think America's in a lot of trouble. And this is why I ran for Congress 10 years ago. It's just a different angle on the mission, but I feel called as much as I can to try to help bring this America together, because I'm not convinced we can stay together.
Yeah. One other thing I was thinking about that I didn't get to ask you as much about is all those different chapters in your life. You already answered the question. One of the questions I had from studying at Strasberg Institute, studying method acting, teacher, social worker, congressman, radio. There's this through line. I did want to ask you, though, about studying acting as a craft. I studied Meisner, and then I studied with Stella's best teachers. That time really equipped me when you have to, as Stanislavski would call it, build a character, create a role. You have to really think about the human condition. You have to breathe life into what's written on the page. Did that preparation, did that training inform how you engage with people to this day, or did it inform how you've done your different jobs differently than other folks that have had those jobs?
Yeah, because, and you probably agree, Corey, the best actors are the truest actors and the most honest actors. And what I loved about acting was honestly losing yourself in a role and conveying that to an audience. It's a lot like what I've done since. I mean, when I'm given a speech, when I'm on the radio, again, this is always honest, but when I go on the radio every night, I got something I want to say about guns because I love guns, and I'm going to assume a role. I'm the teacher about guns tonight. I always felt that same kind of connection when I acted. I really felt like I got something.
Yeah. Now you got me thinking about acting. I think the best times that I had as an actor And I quickly got into producing because I was a good working man's actor, like I wasn't as talented as some of the guys that I was going to school with, the Mark Ruffalo's and those guys. But I was a hard working actor. But I was really fucking talented as a producer. So that's why. But when I did have good moments, I realized that I couldn't feel somebody else's pain. I couldn't feel someone else's joy. I couldn't feel somebody else's emotions. I could only feel mine, but I could execute it in the vein of the character that I was playing.
Cool.
So anyway, that's yet another podcast. I have a whole bunch of other shows that I got produced now. Are you writing? I heard when you were talking to Lucy, you were talking about writing. Are you writing now?
In my dream world, Corey, because I've always felt compelled to engage with people and be in front of people. That's always taken my time. In my dream world, I'm living in the middle of nowhere, just spending the rest of my life writing. I'm finally into another book that I'm writing, and it's basically going to be about the journey I've been on, why I took a blowtorch to my career 5 years ago, and what it can and should mean to America. So kind of something like that.
You've had, as you've mentioned, you've had a unique experience and unique perspectives. From a big picture standpoint, from where you sit now, can you give us a diagnosis of what the hell is wrong with our politics, what's wrong with our country, what's wrong with our culture, and more importantly, what do we do about it?
And you and I may have a different diagnosis. I think the problem is that we no longer agree as a nation on what America is, on what the American experiment is. We fundamentally, as a people, no longer agree on our founding principle. How did we get there? A lot of reasons, but we're there now. And so it's like we now really envision living in a very different country. There are a lot of people I know in red state America who believe in a completely different America than people who live in blue state America. I mean, a completely different America. Corey, we're a married couple that's on the brink, and we should probably fucking split up or maybe get a divorce. But we've decided to go to therapy one final fucking time to see if we can save this marriage. I think that's where we are.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I think I do have a different primary diagnosis, although you're describing something that is undeniable. You were sharing or responding to something DeSantis was saying just the other day about teaching history. So he has a very different history that he once taught than actual history, or at the very least, some sort of watered down white bread version of it. But I think that you are a part of the solution. I think that in the Congress right now, there is a caucus, the Problem Solvers Caucus, that's part of the solution. And I wondered, as watching your old colleague, Kevin McCarthy, suffer through 14 votes before he finally got voted in, that he was beholden to a small group of extremists. I don't understand why folks in Congressman Fitzpatrick's caucus couldn't understand that they could have that same leverage.
Hey, Corey, this is what I'm not pissed at you, but like the whole last couple of weeks, I've been on CNN and MSNBC, and I get pissed at this premise that McCarthy is beholden to a small number of extremists. Bullshit. There are 222 Republicans in the House. There are a hell of a lot more Marjorie Taylor Greenes than Brian Fitzpatrick's. Brian's a good dude. I served with him. Fitzpatrick is the fringe of this party. We talk about election deniers. The vast majority of Republicans in the House are election deniers. The vast majority of Republicans in the House are January 6th sympathizers. As a former House guy, the House perfectly reflects the bases of both parties. You see the same thing on the Democratic side. And the base of the Republican Party is Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene. So it's not a minority. Kevin McCarthy has to deal with most of his caucus. That's where they are.
So Paul Gosar and MTG and Lauren Boebert are closer to the center of the
fringe
party.
Minority anything.
Oh,
Because
man.
No, and here's the thing. There are most of the caucus is with them on damn near everything. They're just not, they're not as outspoken maybe, and they don't say all the crazy shit. But
Yeah.
I could go through all 222 House members with you.
Yeah, you're right.
And the crazies would outnumber the problem solvers.
Unfortunately, in our district, you're absolutely right. You would think that of all districts, Mike Garcia, as a Republican representing California 27, would have some room to hang with the Fitzpatricks and the problem solvers. But everything that you see his public record, what he says in public, his Twitter feed, his voting record is all Paul Gosar and not Brian Fitzpatrick, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Do you have any hope in third party, open primaries, ranked choice voting? Is that part of the solution?
I think a lot of those reforms are part of the solution. I don't believe Washington can fix itself. So I think the fix, I think we're living in revolutionary times. And I've said that for a long time. So and all that means to me is the fix for our problem has got to come from outside. I've wrestled with a new party. I think we need a third party, a fourth party, a fifth party. But I worry that right now isn't the time, because my former party is a real threat to our democracy. So for now, I'm a Democrat, because that's the only other game in town.
I'm hoping that Governor Whitman and Andrew Yang and Miles, they have a long game with the forward party. And I think they do. I don't think
they do.
Yeah. Because I think that if they plant the seeds now at the state and local level, and 24, 26, 28 start to expand from there, I do think there's hope for a party like that, a cross partisan. It's not really cross partisan because they're no longer Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
But over a 10-year span. But if you're hoping that, we're going to win the 2024 presidential election, that's doomed from the get-go.
Completely agree. I completely agree with that, Cor.
There's so much more I want to talk to you about. One little biter thing, and then I have my two big questions to finally land this plane. One is, do you think Jim Jordan thinks Investigation Palooza is really going to persuade anybody, or is he know from the get-go that he's just doing it to raise money and to win Red's got a cha-ching, and what does he think it's going to do?
I know Jordan well. He and I were best friends. He's a true believer. He believes that Democrats are evil and the enemy. Biden is evil and the enemy, and it's his job to investigate the shit out of everything they've done. Does he think it's going to be effective in terms of persuading voters? He doesn't care.
Okay. To him, it's just a war that he has to fight.
It's a war that he has to fight, and he knows, Corey, it will make his voters, the base, happy.
Pisses me off.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I hate to end there, but okay. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I'm not going to let you end on a high note. No, if you and I are going to have a conversation, it's generally going to end on a downer of a note. Answer me this question. You and I are trying to do the same damn thing. Are you frustrated?
Yeah, I am frustrated. I'm more often frustrated with myself because I fucked up. The other night I was at this, it was politics, religion, race, science, whatever. It was a conversation among a bunch of folks that are somewhat prominent in this community. And the most prominent commercial real estate developer came over and hung out with us for a little while. And I might have been one or two drinks in or more. And I said a couple things because he's associated with a pastor that I've learned increasingly is a terrible influence theologically, socially. And I said as much. So I wasn't necessarily frustrated at that guy. He believes that the earth was, created 6,000 years ago in 7 literal 24-hour days. I was more frustrated with myself that I didn't have the posture that Monica Guzman would advocate for. Tell me, so why do you think that? I never thought of it that way. That I couldn't engage with him on a more gracious level. So that's what I'm frustrated. I'm more often frustrated with myself.
Yeah.
But there are those moments when it's like, oh, you know what? We did have a nice conversation.
Yeah.
And I learned something new about why my friend thinks that way. And it opens the door for them to become curious about why I think the way I do.
Well, and even if you and I aren't moving hundreds of thousands of people every week, people who listen to you and I, we are moving some people.
Well, I do have to listen, my show is not nearly as big as the White Flag. I know you have 100 million gazillion listeners, but
bullshit.
No, but you know what? What's encouraging is that it's incremental. So the first time we talked about a little over a year ago, compared to now, we have more listeners by an order of magnitude. Now,
fantastic.
It's really, it's still not big. It's still, I'm not lighting the world on fire, but you know what? Incrementally, it tells me that folks want to have these conversations. They want to hear from somebody they thought was this asshole who's, lighting everything on fire. And, oh, wow. I didn't know that about Joe Walsh, you know? So it is encouraging that it's also encouraging. It's just as encouraging to see Charlie and the Bulwark folks are getting more listeners, and the Dispatch folks, and Ron Steslow and Mike Madrid and Lucy and their team at Politicology are getting more listeners. So it is encouraging.
Long
to me.
game. You got to keep. You're still young. You got to keep we're in this for the long game.
Yeah,
bit by bit, incrementally.
Yeah. So speaking of White Flag, how can folks find you online? The White Flag with Joe Walsh and all the great work that you're doing.
Anywhere people listen to podcasts, White Flag with Joe Walsh is the name of it. Check it out. Every week I try to sit down with another high profile person who doesn't think like me, and we try to respectfully go at it. Follow me on Twitter at Walsh Freedom. That's about it.
Okay. I do have one more question for you. So I got to know Helene a little bit through this process.
Yeah.
Is Helene going to run for? She should run for office. I don't know if you can, but has Helene thought about running? She was a state legislator.
She was in Illinois. She was appointed a state rep because the incumbent Republican state rep ran into some personal trouble, and then she ran for re-election in 2018 which was Trump's really bad year. She's too good and nice and decent for this shitty world of politics. Well,
I would move into your district and just to vote for Helene. Just so to tell her that if that's she's got one vote.
Well, you, me, and Helene have got to break some bread together soon. Absolutely. So I'll text you, and love that. I'll be in your neighborhood, and we're going to make that happen, man. So thanks again for coming. I love hanging out with you. So this has been a real treat for me. I really appreciate it. I respect what you're doing, young man. I really do. Keep it up, brother. Thanks, man. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, hit the subscribe button. Leave us a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend about talking politics and religion without killing each other. We're so easy to find. It's politicsandreligion.us. That's politicsandreligion.us. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week. Thank you for joining us today. If you dig what we're doing here, it is super easy to follow us. You can go to our site, politicsandreligion.us. That's with the and spelled out, A-N-D. Politicsandreligion.us. And we're on all the socials, at TP and R Pod. TP and R Pod for Talking Politics and Religion Pod. And here's a big way you can support us, by becoming one of our patrons. You can even become a producer or executive producer of our program and have a lot more say in who we bring on, the kinds of questions we explore, or just help us keep the lights on. But mostly, we really appreciate you giving us a listen. So for the whole team here at Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.